Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're continuing with a little gap. We're continuing with Uddhava Gita, Krishna's talks with Uddhava, as you see in the painting here on the right side. That's Uddhava at Krishna's feet in Dwarka, presenting questions. And we're continuing with text number 6 from chapter 11, Canto 11. 11.11.6, translation. By chance, 2 birds have made a nest together in the same tree. The 2 birds are friends and are of a similar nature. One of them, however, is eating the fruits of the tree, whereas the other, who does not eat the fruits, is in a superior position due to his potency. He's in a superior position due to his potency. So that superior is Krishna, and that not superior or inferior is the jiva. The tree is the body, and this is a standard metaphor which we heard about last time we discussed Uddhava Gita. Several Upanishad verses that discuss this. And we're continuing. And the continuation is now from Chaitanya Bhagavat. Chaitanya Bhagavat is one of the biographies of Lord Chaitanya's life. This one by Vrindavan Das Thakur. And the final section, or Antya Kanda, chapter 1, text 218. Achyuta replied, this is one of the sons of Advaitacharya, Achyuta or Achyutananda. Achyuta replied, by your sweet will, you'll become the friend of all living entities, whereas the Vedas declare that you are the father of all. This is Achyuta or Achyutananda to Lord Chaitanya. Commentary from Bhaktisiddhanta. When Sri Gaurasundara visited the house of Sri Advaita in Shantipur in 1509, Achyutananda was a 5-year-old child. Sri Achyutananda probably took birth in 1504, which would make him 5-year-old in 1509. This child said to Mahaprabhu, quote, you are the friend of all living entities. The Vedic scriptures, however, have established that you are the source of everything. Unquote. In this way, Sri Achyutananda established Sri Chaitanya as the object of the 2 Vedic statements, namely Dva Suparna, 2 birds, and Yato Va Imani, you're the source of everything. And Taittiriya Upanishad has this Yato Va Imani. Taittiriya Upanishad 3.1.1. Yato Va Imani Bhutani Jayante. Translation. The supreme absolute truth is that from which everything is born. And then this Dwa Suparna has many references. One of them is Mundaka Upanishad and Svetashvatara Upanishad have the very same verse that starts Dva Suparna Sayuja Sakaya, etc. 2 companion birds sit together in the shelter of the same pipala tree. One of them is relishing the taste of the tree's berries, while the other refrains from eating and instead watches over his friend. Unquote. In the Gopaltapani Upanishad, it is stated, Dva Suparnau Bhavato, etc., has a different, same beginning, different text. There are two birds. One of them is part and parcel of the Supreme Brahman and is subordinate to him. He enjoys the fruits while the other bird simply witnesses. And then Bhagavatam, this morning's verse, 11:11:6. So this is Achyutananda speaking to Lord Chaitanya, and the scripture confirms what Achyutananda says, including this morning's verse. We read the translation. Also in Srimad Bhagavatam 6:4-24, it is stated, quote, as the sense objects, there's 5, form, taste, touch, smell, sound. As the sense objects cannot understand how the senses perceive them, so the conditioned soul, although residing in his body along with the supersoul, cannot understand how the supreme spiritual person, the master of the material creation, directs his senses. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto that supreme person who is the supreme controller. So this is just indicating part of the significance of this verse. Again, this is text. This is the 8th class from this chapter, and we're still in verse number 6. So that means these are important verses because there's a lot of reference to these verses because of their importance. Here's a commentary on Bhagavad Gita 6:23, Dhyan Yoga. Paramatma, who is situated as the witness in this body, is different from the jiva. This Paramatma is not a jiva. The monist or Advaitavadis consider the jivatma and the Paramatma to be one, but it is clear from this verse that within each body, Paramatma, who is the witness and permitter, is different from the jivatma. He is superior to the jivatma. He is called Paramatma, or the superior Atma. This Paramatma is Kala, a portion of a portion, or an anksha of an anksha of Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna. Without his permission, the Jivatma cannot do anything. There are unlimited Jivatmas, and Paramatma eternally exists within each of them as their friend and supreme well-wisher. Although he lives within the living entity, or with the living entity, Paramatma is always the master of both the jiva and the external potency maya. Same like Achyuta or Achyutananda said, he's both. Bhagavan has bestowed an invaluable treasure upon the living entity in the form of independence. By properly utilizing this independence, the living entity can very easily relish the nectar of loving service to Bhagavan in his eternal abode. But by misusing this independence, he becomes bound by Maya, and while suffering from the threefold miseries, he is trapped in the cycle of birth and death. Therefore, how can a living entity who is overpowered by Maya ever be Bhagavan, the master of Maya? Such a conception is completely erroneous and opposed to the conclusion of all the scriptures. Paragraph. Now comes our reference to this morning's verse. Paramatma is very clearly described in the Shrutis as different from the Jivatma, such as Nityo Nityanam, Chaitanas Chaitananam, Sritashvatara. He is the supreme eternal among all eternals. That is, he is the topmost eternal being among all conscious beings. It is he who bestows consciousness, the original consciousness. Moreover, it is said in the Sritashvatara and Mundaka Upanishads, Dvasaparna Sayuja Sakaya. We heard that one. Shira Dakshayi Purusha, that's super soul, and the living entity live together in this temporary material world, the body, just like two birds who are friends sitting on a peepala tree. One of the living entity is tasting the fruits of the tree according to his actions, and the other, Paramatma, is the witness. He is not enjoying the fruits, but he is watching his friend. Hey, 11.11.6, Bhagavatam also states, two birds in the form of the living entity and the supreme controller have a relationship, being equal in quality. That quality is consciousness. They are living in the nest, or the heart, of the tree, or the body, by the will of providence. One bird, the living entity, is enjoying the fruits, or karma, of that tree, the body. The other, Ishvara, or supreme controller, is not enjoying the fruits. He is ever satisfied in eternal bliss, being happily situated due to the strength of his potencies, such as Jnana. That's a little bit longer translation of this morning's verse. Last paragraph for text 6. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur quotes Krishna as saying, "The living entity is my friend." Krishna saying, "Living entity is my friend." Capital M, Krishna speaking. "Living entity is my friend. He becomes inclined to me when he becomes purely situated in his marginal nature. This marginal nature is his independence. The perfection of Jaiva Dharma, the eternal occupation of the living entity, is to achieve pure love for me by using his marginal or independent nature. When the living entity misuses that independent nature, he enters the material field. I, as Paramatma, then become his companion. Therefore, I alone am the witness, the permitter, the supporter, and protector, and the supreme controller of all the living entities' actions. As Paramatma, I am always present in the body as Parama Purusha, the Supreme Person. I award the results of whatever karma is performed by him in his conditioned state. So that's the end of this section, chapter 11, text number 6. Now we're going to go to some pictures. By chance, there's two birds up there on the top. Two birds have made a nest together in the same tree. The two birds are friends and are of similar nature. One of them, however, is eating the fruits of the tree, whereas the other, who does not eat the fruits, is in a superior position due to his potency. Next, notice that little skinny guy, that's the living entity. The example of two birds in the same tree is given to illustrate the presence within the heart of the material body of both the individual soul and the supersoul, the personality of Godhead, just as a bird makes a nest in a tree. The living entity sits within the heart. The example is appropriate because the bird is always distinct from the tree. Similarly, both the individual soul and the supersoul are distinct entities separate from the temporary material body. Okay, then next. The word balena indicates that the Lord is never in darkness or ignorance, but is always full of his perfect, blissful consciousness. And one more for text 7. 6. Two more. The word the ka rao looks like the ka yao. It's a Y. Saka yao. Anyway, or two friends is also significant. Our real friend is Lord Krishna, who is situated within the heart. Only He knows our actual needs, and only He can give us real happiness. Now, He's in that picture on the left side of the heart, kind of faintly, but He's there. He's holding His flute. And on the lower right side, that's the living entity reaching for Krishna. And one more from text number 6. Lord Krishna is so kind that He patiently sits in the heart, trying to guide the conditioned soul back home, back to Godhead. Lord Krishna is such a faithful, loving friend that He accompanies even the most demoniac living entity, and is also in the heart of the insect, pig, and dog. That is because Lord Krishna is supremely Krishna conscious and sees every living entity as part and parcel of Himself. So we're quite familiar with that metaphor. So now we're moving on to the next verse, text 7. If you want to follow it along in your handheld device, here's 11:11:7. The bird who does not eat the fruits of the tree is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who, by His omniscience, perfectly understands His own position and that of the conditioned living entity represented by the eating bird. That living entity, on the other hand, does not understand himself or the Lord. He is covered by ignorance and thus is called eternally conditioned, whereas the personality of Godhead, being full of perfect knowledge, is eternally liberated. Remember, I'll remind you, some of you may not have been around for this discussion. Before chapter 11 is chapter 10. And at the end of chapter 10, Uddhava asked a question. Please explain. There is this expression that says the same living entity may be eternally liberated or eternally conditioned, but that sounds like a contradiction because eternally is eternally. So there are different ways of understanding eternally, must be. And so this chapter is explaining that. So the living entity is eternally conditioned, the supreme in this material world, and living entity, the supreme living entity, is eternally liberated. He doesn't become liberated, he's eternally liberated. Bhaktisiddhanta's translation reads, the supersoul, who does not taste the fruit of the tree and who is the shelter of eternal knowledge, knows all about himself and the living entities. However, the living entity who tastes the fruit of the tree is ignorant of both himself and the Supreme Lord. The living entity has been conditioned by the Lord's illusory energy since time immemorial. That's a long time. And the Supreme Lord, who is always in full knowledge, is eternally liberated. And here's the BBT purport. The word vidya, maya, in this verse indicates the internal potency of the Lord and not the external potency, mahamaya. Why is that distinction being made? That distinction is being made because in an earlier text, text number 2, it was declared by Krishna that there's Maya Shakti has these two divisions. Exactly, there's then further divisions. But two of them are Vidya and Avidya. The Vidya and Avidya that cover and relieve the covering of the soul are both coverings, or designations, or upadhis. The explanation is given. This is just review. that living entity is eternally pure. There's no question of becoming liberated, because the living entity is eternally pure as the Supreme Lord is eternally pure, like it's said in this verse. The soul itself is isn't becoming liberated. The soul is always liberated. That's the point. So the Vidya and Avidya potency of Maya Shakti do this liberating and covering. But the Maya Shakti is a reflection of the Lord's internal potency. Right? This world is a reflection of the spiritual world. Whatever exists here has its spiritual counterpart in the spiritual world. Whatever in the spiritual world, it has its material counterpart in the material world, but a distorted reflection of the real thing. Clear? Clear. So now what's being said here, the BBT purport is explaining this potency that's with the Supreme Lord always is unlimited, because he's unlimited, and one of those unlimited potencies is his spiritual or internal Vidyamaya. So, first sentence. The word Vidyamaya in this verse indicates the internal potency of the Lord and not the external potency, Mahamaya. Within the material world, there is Vidya, or material science, and Avidya, material ignorance. But in this verse, Vidya means the internal spiritual knowledge by which the Supreme Personality of Godhead is fixed in omniscience. He doesn't become omniscient. It's one of his potencies that are as eternal as he is. The example of two birds in a tree, which is given in many Vedic literatures, demonstrates the statement Nityo Nityanam. That is, there are two categories of living entities, namely the Supreme Lord and minute Jiva soul. The conditioned Jiva soul, forgetting his identity as an eternal servant of the Lord, tries to enjoy the fruits of his own activities and thus comes under the spell of ignorance. This bondage of ignorance has existed since time immemorial and can be rectified only by one's taking to the loving devotional service of the Lord, which is full of spiritual knowledge. Got that? Devotional service is of the internal potency, and therefore it also inherently has spiritual knowledge. So in contact with devotional service, then one's inherent spiritual knowledge becomes awakened, because the living entity is part and parcel, but tiny. So it's covered and forgotten. So it's awakened by contact with devotional service. Nice combination. Very practical. Very practical. In conditioned life, the living entity is forced by the laws of nature to engage in pious and impious fruitive activities, but the liberated position of every living entity is to offer the fruits of his work to the Lord, the superior enjoyer. It should be understood that even when the living entity is in a liberated condition, his knowledge is never in a liberated condition, his knowledge is never in quality with that, in quantity, with that of the personality of Godhead. Even Lord Brahma, the supreme living entity within this universe, acquires only partial knowledge of the personality of Godhead and his potencies. This is confirmed. In Bhagavad Gita 4.5, the Lord explains his superior knowledge to Arjuna. Bahuni me vititani janmani tava charjuna tanyaham veda sarvani natvam veta parantapa. The Blessed Lord, translation, the Blessed Lord said, many, many births both you and I have passed, I can remember all of them, but you cannot, O subdue the enemy. The term baddha, or bound, is also understood to refer to the living entity's eternal dependence upon the Lord, either in the conditioned or liberated state. In the kingdom of Maya, the living entity is bound to the cruel laws of birth and death, whereas in the spiritual sky, the living entity is fixed in a bond of love to the Lord. Liberation means freedom from the miseries of life, but never freedom from one's loving relationship with Lord Krishna, which is the essence of one's eternal existence. According to Srila Madhvacharya, the Lord is the only eternal free living entity, and all other living entities are eternally dependent and bound to the Lord, either through blissful loving service or through the bondage of Maya. The conditioned soul should give up tasting the bitter fruits of the tree of material existence and turn to his dearmost friend, Lord Krishna, who is sitting within his heart. There is no pleasure equal to or greater than the pleasure of pure devotional service to Lord Krishna, and by tasting the fruit of love of Krishna, the liberated living entity enters the ocean of happiness. Sounds inviting. Let's go. Here's Bhaktisiddhanta's purport. Shorter. There is always a distinction between the Supreme Lord, who is the supreme controller, and the living entities who are his eternal servants. The Lord is the master of all potencies, and living entities are subordinate to him. The Lord does not enjoy the fruits of karma, and he is omniscient. The living entity enjoys the fruits of his own karma, and he is ignorant. Due to ignorance, the living entity has become conditioned since time immemorial, has been conditioned since time immemorial. If he reinstates himself as the servant of the Supreme Lord, then by the influence of spiritual knowledge, he becomes eternally liberated. In his conditioned state of existence, the living entity enjoys by acting piously and suffers by acting impiously. In the liberated state of existence, there is no question of piety or impiety, because one is fully devoted to the Supreme Lord and is not attached to the fruits of his karma. Just a couple more sections and we're done. Bhaktisiddhanta, in his own writing style, has a liking for Uddhava Gita, and he's made commentary specific to the whole Uddhava Gita section. So along with his translation and his commentary, he's also made a summary or gloss of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary. So we're going to read both. Bhaktisiddhanta's summary of Vishwanath's commentary, and then Vishwanath's commentary. So here's Bhaktisiddhanta's summary. It's short. The super soul knows himself as well as the living entity, and he does not eat the bitter fruit of the tree of material existence. The conditioned living entity, on the other hand, who tries to enjoy the fruits of his labor, neither knows himself nor the Supreme Lord. These living entities are eternally conditioned, whereas the Supreme Lord is eternally full of knowledge. The word vidya in this verse refers to the internal spiritual knowledge of the Supreme Lord, which is distinct from material knowledge. In the Gopal Tapani Upanishad, it is stated, you heard this one, but here it is again. There are two birds living as friends in the same tree, the living entity and the supersoul. The living entity is a separated part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and he enjoys the fruits of his fruitive actions. The supersoul is a plenary portion of the Supreme Lord, and he witnesses the actions of the living entity. So Vishwanath also quotes same thing. The Dvasaparna Bhavato verse makes this distinction between the vidya potency of supersoul and the vidya potency of Maya, the material knowledge potency, material knowledge that material knowledge that can award liberation but is without shelter, the Supreme Lord in devotional service, is impermanent, like everything in this world. I've been using the example like the weather in Boston these days. Quite impermanent. Quite impermanent. A lot of rain though. Smriti says, Smriti, this is Bhagavatam 8.5.27, Chaya tapau yatra na grad prakshau. In the Lord there is no vidya or avidya, no hate or favoritism. Same. There's the spiritual and there's the material. The material is a reflection of the spiritual. There's Vidya Shakti in the spiritual. There's the reflection Vidya Shakti, or Vijamaya, or Vidya potency in the material. But material knowledge is not the same. And finally, Jiva Goswami, really short, the Lord is Vidya Maya. That is, having Vidya which manifests from his Swarup Shakti, not from Maya Shakti. This is explained in Akrura's prayers. Akrura's prayers come in the 10th canto Bhagavatam. His prayers by which we say he achieved spiritual perfection. That was spiritual perfection, just in case you want to know what it's going to be like. His prayers that by which we know he achieved spiritual perfection came after what he saw in the river Jamuna when he took his bath. And he saw the Supreme Lord, and the Supreme Lord also in the chariot, etc. He offered prayers. So within his prayers is the same idea. The same idea is you have your own Vidya potency. In this material world, there's another reflection of that Vidya potency, which doesn't grant you shelter in you, but one who has shelter in you gets the eternal, spiritual, internal potency of knowledge of you. Okay, so now some illustrations. And they're nice. This is Radha, who's that? Shabari. Yeah, she's offering to Ram and Lakshman. There is no pleasure equal to or greater than the pleasure of pure devotional service to Lord Krishna, and by tasting the fruit of love of Krishna, the liberated living entity enters the ocean of happiness. So she's in the ocean of happiness. And there's some wildlife checking out her ocean of happiness experience. And Lake Pampa in the background. Nice painting. So that's it for this morning, verses 6 and 7 of Uddhava Gita. We'll continue tomorrow with text 8 and 9. 10 after 8, let's see if there's some discussion. It's pretty, we've been covering this now for a few classes, so it's pretty clear. And it's not a new concept. So let's see if we have some discussion. Radha's enthusiastic, as usual. You have to come forward a little bit, I think.
So that point that Krishna is our only real friend really stuck into my heart because, because I had so many friends that were not real friends and they weren't always with me. So I was thinking that maybe I could be like Krishna, like be a nice friend and always be with a person. But also sometimes it's very hard to not get contaminated from other people. But Krishna can't get contaminated. So how to be a good friend to everyone?
Excellent question. By spiritual potency, then you can A, not become contaminated, and B, be a friend. And friend is because a real friend is one who reminds others of Krishna. Or a real friend for you is one who reminds you of Krishna. That's being a real friend or having real friends. And supposing somebody's not, a pure devotee, just imagine, close your eyes and imagine a friend that's not a pure devotee. And so how do you be their friend, which is your question? Well, you can be Krishna conscious and recognize that they're Krishna's part and parcel and dear to him. And, they're befuddled by the modes of nature in different ways, and they're acting in ways that's not, favorable to a loving service to Krishna. But I'm not going to judge them. I'll try to be their friend because I know they're dear to Krishna.
But usually their bad habits come
they're bad habits.
Us.
Yeah, not usually, always.
How do you avoid their karma to going to us by association?
Well, their karma doesn't go to you. The modes of nature may go to you, but their karma doesn't go to you. And that you're protected from their modes of nature, their particular modes of nature, by the power of devotional service. Bhakti Shakti protects you.
And another related / follow-up.
And then another is by maintaining, while you're with your friends, you're maintaining a consciousness of your loving relationship with those who are with your spiritual master and those who are elevated devotees. And, that's protection too. Spiritual protection. Let's just say somebody is going on Harinam in the public street. They're not sitting in the living room or in the temple room in front of the deities, but they're going out in the public street. And then people are doing, not necessarily sattvic things out there in the public. And you're there chanting and you're, experiencing or seeing or whatever. They're doing not very sattvic things. You're protected by the spiritual potency of the holy name and the potency of Lord Chaitanya broadcasting the holy name. Or if not, that, then, attending Rath Yatra, or distributing books, or going into some public forum and we're speaking the message of Krishna. You're protected because you're within the internal potency. That's Bhakti Shakti. It has that potency to protect you. Stay within the mood of devotional service wherever you are, even when you're with your friends, and as the stronger bhakti is, the more you'll be protected. The weaker bhakti is, the more you'll be influenced or infected. So have strong bhakti. Keep friends. Recognize they're not the same as your dear friend Krishna, but you're friendly to them in a way that's Krishna conscious. You're acting as an instrument of Krishna to help them remember what they've forgotten. Exactly what Prabhupada said. Exactly what Prabhupada said. I've come not to teach you something new, but to remind you of what you have forgotten. He was right in the midst of people doing, not nice things. Their personal habits were not elevated, but he was protected.
Sometimes we try to also leave out people that we don't like and be friends with our best friends.
Yes.
Which is not Krishna.
That's right.
So how do you avoid that too?
Well, you have to become Krishna conscious. Initially, there's like and dislike, friends and enemies, and the material boundaries. It's all about me, it's all about Krishna. And so, at some point, as bhakti evolves, that diminishes friend-enemy thing, I don't like thing. And then you do what Krishna likes. that displaces. You still discriminate. Here's a more elevated, here's a less elevated, here's a really toxic person. You still discriminate, but your behavior is corresponding to the individual, but always Krishna is the object of love while you're interacting with anybody. In the house, out of the house, in the public, in the school, wherever you are. Mindful of you're there to please Krishna. That's protection. Next.
That's it I have.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay. Behind you.
In the last slide that you showed about Shabari and she's feeling ocean of happiness, is it that when she was serving Lord Rama, she was feeling ocean of happiness, or all throughout her journey?
She was anticipating. She was being prepared to anticipate by her spiritual master, Matanga. And her anticipation was consummated by meeting, but she was in happiness anticipating. Now there's other emotions along when you're anticipating, but there's a happiness that's substantial, palpable.
And another question is about, is there a role of first of all, I want to clarify, you said material science and material ignorance, if I got it right?
That's Hridayananda Maharaj using his way of speaking things. You want me to read the sentence again precisely?
Or I can look it up later if you...
Okay, so what's your question?
So my question is there a role material science can play in spiritual science, in understanding spiritual science? And part two is that the material science that we study in education system, is that what it is referring to, or is it really more understanding material energy of...
I'm distracted. I'm still looking for the language. So say it again, and I'll close my paper. Let me just look, see if I can find it precisely. Why don't we circle back to your question? You find the precise quote, and then we'll give you the microphone back again. You can ask. So you want to know what's the role of spiritual science in spiritual life? Excuse me, material science in spiritual life.
Yeah, in understanding spiritual science.
The role of material science in understanding spiritual science. I'm not sure how to answer this, but my thought goes to this. In both, the faculty of intelligence, that is discerning one thing from another thing, is required. In material science, discerning one thing from another thing is required. Intelligence, in that kind of intelligence, is required. So here, just taking this for example, here's discerning the difference between the Jivatma and the Paramatma. That discerning capacity can be used. Now, it's not, the conclusion is different because the observation is different. But the principle of discerning one thing from another thing, you can apply, and you develop that discerning capacity through material science, and it can be an obstacle, but it can also be an asset for discerning things in spiritual science. But that's just a foothold, that discerning capacity. Again, discerning capacity, it's just a foothold. But it may be a necessary foothold to go, full into devotional service. I've considered very carefully, it's quite reasonable. I'm convinced. Not just reasonable, I'm convinced. Let me jump with both feet. And then it's another kind of, then spiritual science doesn't have any function anymore. You can look back at it and say, this compares with that. Here's a nice example. Very clearly, in discussions with the person in charge of the Temple of Vedic Planetarium, their effort is not comparing the model of modern astronomy and astrology, with modern astronomy, with Vedic cosmology. They're making their very best effort to transparently and properly represent this is what the Vedic texts say about cosmology, period, or exclamation point. They're not making a comparison. Now, some people say, I know some people that say, very well, you want to be transparently and properly represent Vedic cosmology. Fantastic. However, there are going to be people looking at this model that don't have that awareness of that model, and they're going to look at it from the lens of material science. So you better be prepared to, this compares to that. And, so far the response that I've heard is, well, we're not ready for that yet, because we want to make sure we have the proper presentation of the Vedic model. I know for a fact, it's not like good guesswork, there are persons on the periphery that have a different idea of what the Vedic cosmology model is. And they're, doing with people that think they know what something is, with other people that think they know what something is, and they're making their papers. And so they want to have a bulletproof presentation of the Vedic cosmology. It's not like they're interested in defeating other people. They're interested in understanding Vedic cosmology. The time will come, they will have to, and they will engage with scientists that say, wait a minute, what about this empiric information and that, empiric information? And then it's not just, well, the senses are imperfect, so we chuck it. It's not just that gross dismissal. There's going to have to be it's a bold. Now back to your question. That was just an example. It doesn't have a place in transcendence. Now, if you're going to be a transcendentalist and try to help those that aren't become confident in the transcendental picture, you may have to use the discerning capacity, the intellect, to help them become convinced. I was hearing a discussion about Ramanujacharya. As elevated as he was, he had a debate with someone from another persuasion. It wasn't a Mayavadi, but someone from another persuasion, and it took 18 days to convince the person. Now, the difference was, the discussion was, it was different than defeating, because defeating means you smudge shame and humiliation in the face of somebody. That's one way of having a discussion on a topic. Put down the other person and all that. It's a whole other thing to persuade the person that has a deep conviction in something else to accept the fallibility or the holes in the bucket of that other and accept this one is superior. It took him 18 days. So, it doesn't have a place, but it has a place. And when you're reaching out to those that have another idea, you need to know what they say. And, go on, make a bridge, go on the bridge to their side, take a look at their side, take a look at it. Sadhuputta did this all the time. Like that was a major strategy. He'd present, here's a picture of something. And you have to understand that something in a way that the people that know that something will say, he understands that something. And then say, wait a minute, there's some holes in this bucket. Here's some holes. In many cases, it was because he was a mathematician. spiritual science or material science through mathematical calculation. For example, the models of inspiration is one of his essays. Models of inspiration. Where does inspiration? Well, if you're a scientist, it's one thing. It's, events that happen at the synapses of nerve endings. Electrochemical events. That's what inspiration is. So what he did was he took, what science says is that the square inches or whatever it is, cubic inches of brain and how many events can take place per second, and did the math and said it's just not mathematically possible for Mozart to compose a symphony coming back from a walk in the park. Mathematically, here's the math. Or then other events that he was familiar with. Somebody in the field of mathematics solved a math problem decades before they had the tools to solve the math problem, and it came to them in a flash. Or Archimedes and the celebrated thing of, the crown in the bathtub and that whole thing. It just came to him in a flash. So it's not possible that it's just electrochemical events in the synapses of the brain. Just there's a hole in that bucket. So what's some other models to look at? So too many holes, not just that one, but too many holes. So where does inspiration come from? Here's another model. It doesn't prove the other model. It's helping, reasonable people, because they're unreasonable people, but there's some reasonable people, to let go of that model and take a look at this model. So it has its place, but it's not prerequisite.
Just another clarification on that. Is the material science that's referred here, so is it related to the education system that
Yes.
we have, or is it?
But it's more than that. That, Vidya and Avidya, just like Isha Upanishad, 2 verses that speak of that. That's what it refers to. But the Vidya potency that we read in the earlier verses goes up to the stage of liberation. It's not just, material phenomena.
And it's like the Sambandha Gyan in chapter 1 of Harinam Chintamani that you were.
Not exactly, because Sambandha is connecting with the absolute truth. Some persons that have Gyan, they study the Upanishads, etc., Vedanta Sutra, etc. They have no sense of Sambandha Gyan, how everything connects with Krishna. They read and they get Vidya and they consider themselves liberated. And liberated in the negative sense, they're detached from the temporary because they see the difference between the eternal and the temporary. They're liberated. According to what we read in the earlier verses, it's like very elaborate. You want to go back and read it, you can. But it's the Maya Shakti has these 2 divisions, Vidya and Avidya. And they're both are designations. Becoming liberated is a designation. Becoming conditioned is a designation. The soul is neither becoming liberated or becoming conditioned. Or conditioned. The soul is pure. That was the argument that Krishna gives. So it's material knowledge, Vidya, but it's also up to the stage of negation of the temporary, leaving you with that which isn't temporary. And there's a Vidya potency that does that. It's a Maya Shakti potency, according to Krishna. And categorically it's different because it doesn't have the origin is the personality of Godhead, take shelter there. Sambandha Gyan is missing. Gyan Shakti is there, up to the stage of liberation. And there's lower stages, like how to rob a bank. Takes knowledge to rob a bank. Or all the things that they're doing. I don't even know what it is, but the Russians are doing with something, technology and stealing information or something, whatever it's called. So it takes knowledge, vidya. But it's not samad again. So there's gradations of knowledge. And that's distinct from transcendence. And so, anyway.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Next.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. There are 8.4 million species, right, in this material world. And if you see human beings is one of the species, could be.
It's one of the 400,000.
One of the 400,000. So the human population is increasing, means other species population is decreasing.
Mm-hmm.
All the jivas is, the total jivas is...
Just like where this house is. What was here before this house was here? How many living entities were here before this house was here? Now there's 4.
Yeah. So we need to understand the total jivas is constant and one species.
That's right. That's right.
And also the species in Goloka is also same, the number of the species in...
of course, that's eternal.
So he said 1-to-1 replica will be there in the Goloka also, means...
Well, it's not a 1-to-1. What's there is here in a distorted, perverted picture of what's there. So it's not a 1-to-1 replica. You got your notes. Good. Go ahead.
Maharaj, thank you for your class. I was you were telling that first I wanted to add to Atulya's discussion a little bit. Like Maharaj, the material science, like my understanding, like, or rather, like I always convince myself like this, that science is, because I'm into that field. So science is something that's evolutionary, rather, like we are going like evolutionary, just in the process.
Yes.
But probably devolutionary, looking at all the in consciousness, like looking at the way it goes on. When it comes to spiritual science, it's devolution. Because I had long ago probably read a book called Devolution, written by one of the devotees, and I wasn't sure if it's Sadaputta Das himself. I'm not sure.
No,
Michael Cramo. Yeah, yes, correct. Yeah,
Michael Cramo.
And that was called devolution. So spiritual science is devolutionary. However, consciousness, by consign consciousness level, like it's evolutionary. I mean, is that a right understanding?
It's kind of jumbled up. Let me just get an ironing board and see if I can fix it. The modern science idea, and they may have modified it, but let's say the Darwinian idea is not evolution of consciousness, but evolution of species. And as species evolves, Darwin doesn't so much speak about consciousness, but one can kind of try to insert the faculties of discernment for each species becomes better and better and better and better. Not maybe they wouldn't say that. I don't know. But when the human form of life is evolved, then there's more discerning capacity. We can send spaceships to Mars and the moon and stuff like that, and you can do other things with technology. Now, the target in that species evolution is not self-realization. The target is enjoying in varieties of ways to become an enjoyer and try to limit suffering by vaccines and things like that. So, chemotherapy and, things that just help people endure the hardship of material existence. So that's evolution. This devolution, that's Dhruta Karma's own term. Dhruta Karma's term says in it's descending from higher consciousness, like the Supreme, through higher realms of rishis, devas, prajapatis, and then there's devolution down and down and down. That's devolution of consciousness. Because you read the Bhagavatam carefully, and I haven't read his book because it's too thick, but I understand the principle that very early, each day of Brahma, it happens again and again, there's prajapatis that, boom, voila, they make, all the species. They have Shakti, because they're higher beings, to make species that are lower beings. Animals and snakes and birds and thises and that's. They have that gift or the Shakti from Brahma, and because his job is to create a universe and fill it up. So he creates prajapatis and they fill it up. That's the devolution idea of species and consciousness. From the higher, it's descending, as opposed to the modern science, or at least the Darwinian idea, that we don't even talk about souls or consciousness, it's just matter, and matter gets together, and makes amino acids, and amino acids say, let's get together, and wow, you got a one-celled living entity. It takes a lot of time and some lightning and some other things, but you get a living entity. And then, it starts to evolve and evolve and evolve. So it's mechanistic or biological evolution. And his term devolution is from higher consciousness and higher life forms. All the other life forms evolve or devolve from them. Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Maharaj, I had one more. You were talking about reflections, like Goloka Vrindavan, we oftentimes hear that, whatever is here is a reflection of Goloka Vrindavan. And I'm actually curious to, hear some examples or, however you would like to put it, like some reflection of judgmentalism. In this world we see, I've tried this so much, but I feel we say this quality is in Krishna, and hence we see this quality in us. You would probably see this, and I've seen that led to myself, it's so hard not to be judgmental. Even if I'm looking at some wall, I start thinking about, the possibilities of, whatever, even a non-material, a non-living thing. I'm keen to understand some examples of how it would look like in the spiritual world.
Well, the pure status is there. And the pure status is discrimination. It's right in Bhagavad Gita. There's 3 modes. And there's various manifestations of 3 modes. And this mode looks like this, that mode looks like that, and the other mode looks like the other. It's, there's discerning, or discrimination in a good sense of discrimination, seeing this from that, one thing from another thing. And it's not judgmental, because there's not, all living entities are equal to Krishna. While all living entities are equal to Krishna, he has affection for those who have affection for him. And some have different kinds and intensities of affection. And so it's not judgmentalism, because judgmentalism is this is good and that's bad. But he has, through rasa, he has this type of affection, that type of affection. But he has there's a really nice section when Krishna's glorifying the trees. Now, who glorifies trees? But these are very clearly glorious. They're great saints, this and that, and and they're just trees. And by his glorification, they're experiencing his glorification, and they become even more glorious. So it's not judgmentalism, because that's the contaminated picture. For there's discrimination and there's degrees of affection, or types of rasa, and even intensities within the same rasa. That's what it looks like. Now, what it looks like over here is not about Krishna. It's about me and my mind. And I like this and I don't like that. And we make judgments.
So, discerning things as they are.
Yes.
Is that what? Okay.
That's so there's rasa, taste. It, what hits the heart, and how it hits the heart. No, judgment here is not just discerning. This is a bad activity. Then there's how it hits the heart. And as if we're Krishna making a judgment about somebody. You have something? Yes, I thought so. Are we doing online? One, okay.
Hi Krishna Maharaj.
Hi
Thank
Krishna.
you. So I'm not trying to pose this question as a challenge, but it's just a humble question.
Uh-oh.
So,
I'm intimidated by the preamble.
no. I got this question, so I'm just trying to get the answer for the same question. Answer for the same question which I got. So I was sharing this knowledge. This is in connection to the what you have been answering to Atulya Mataji's question.
Yes, the science question.
Yeah, the science question, exactly. So in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says, Manashashtandriyani prakritistani karshati. So when I was sharing this knowledge to a 5th grade school student, like he was asking, I know the senses are 5 senses only. Like how come mind is another 6th sense? Like so how to explain like the spiritual knowledge is Krishna's knowledge is perfect actually, so and material knowledge doesn't encompass the subtle body. So how to explain the mind to the in a material way, like
So what's the age now? 6 years old?
5th grade
5th grade?
Yeah, 5th grade student.
5th grade student.
Yeah.
Okay. The answer to how do we respond depends upon the capacity of an individual to understand. So you put the microphone down. Yeah. Probe with them a little bit. What do the senses do? When we talk about senses, what is it? What's the functional definition of a sense? What do they do? You don't have to answer. You're not the 5th grade student, but this is how you can speak to them. So you see, help them, guide them to get a clear picture in their mind. It's their words. You guide their words, so they state, this is what senses do. Now, how about this? How about that? Yeah, that's okay. That's what senses do. Okay, that's a functional definition. Now, where does that information gathered by the senses go? Goes to the mind, right? So it's a similar function. It's just like gathering all the information from the 5 senses. Here's the 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that information goes where? It goes to the mind. So it's a 6th sense. It's not directly gathering smell, sound, touch, taste, and etc. but it's the repository of all those. And that, and in that sense, it's the sixth sense. Now, my dear fifth grade student, there are other definitions that are not exactly, describing that same function, so it can be described in a different way. But common is 6. And there's other models. It can be described in other ways. So be flexible. But don't toss it in the garbage can, because it's one of the functions of the mind. So and then you go through it again. So let's go through it again. Here's what senses, functional definition of senses. Here's what the mind is. Here's a corresponding function of the mind, and therefore it's called sixth sense. On that basis, how's that? Yeah, that's okay. Then you may get a yeah, but kind of response. And then you address whatever the yeah, but is. So that's another way of looking at it. That's a fantastic. You're really thinking clearly and carefully. That's another way of looking at it. And here's another way of looking at it. And on that basis, it's called the sixth sense. Encourage thoughtfulness and guide rather than tell. That's one response to your question. We're going to have one online question. We're going to end.
Can I ask one clarifying question before?
Sure.
So the two birds in a tree, the tree was in one of the readings that you did probably a couple of days ago. That was related to the inverted banyan tree, and you mentioned that the banyan tree and the pipalaya tree are being used interchangeably. So generally,
in some cases they are.
Mm-hmm. So generally, when I think about this analogy, it seems like that the tree is a standard tree where there's an eating bird and then there is a watching bird sitting in the tree. But if we map it to the same analogy, it's an inverted pipalaya tree. That's what that dwap.
You just making a comment.
I just wanted to clarify whether that's the inverted tree or the proper tree.
Oh, come on.
In trying to combine
even in Hawaii, there's a temple. In the backyard of the Hawaii temple, there's a humongous banyan tree. And it's really clear which is the trunk and which are the branches. But the branches grow down and down and down. There's so many look like roots growing in, coming from the branches. But there's a main trunk at the same time. That's an observation from at least that banyan tree. Mm-hmm. So the metaphor is used where maybe there are banyan trees where you can't really discern which is the main trunk and which are the, what's coming from the branches. Mm-hmm. So my response to your question is, I don't think it's so important. It's a metaphor that's used to help one understand chapter 15.
The reason I'm asking this question...
I wonder why you're asking a question.
The reason I'm asking this question is that, is it okay to take the whole 15th chapter, verse 1-2, and the whole description of inverted banyan tree, and then extend that description to talk about there are two birds sitting on that tree, and then try to complete the picture? And that's the reason.
And it's also possible if you don't do that.
Yes. Yeah, I'm just trying to see whether it is authorized to do that kind of...
It's authorized.
Okay.
Next question. Online?
Okay. So this question is from Amara Mataji. Hare Krishna Maharaj. When feelings of separation from near ones overcome us, how do we remain situated in sincere service to Krishna without being apathetic to our own feelings and to others?
You get out your compass and point towards the North Star. By that I mean you step back, you go into a reflective mode, and you see, here's acknowledging this emotion, this feeling, this feeling, and how does my feeling this feeling connect with reality with a capital R? That's the North Star, Krishna. And to what degree is this feeling that I'm feeling connected to Krishna? To what degree is the feeling I'm feeling connected to Maya, or the reflection of my original feeling for Krishna? I'm not negating that feeling. I'm just putting that feeling in its proper place. And the proper place is the eternal relationship with Krishna and the affinity or attachment for Krishna. And I'm not there yet, so I'm feeling this other feeling, and that's why I'm feeling this other feeling. So it's not good or bad. It's just understanding of why that this particular feeling is there, and let me place that particular feeling, align it, that's the compass exercise, with the original feeling, the natural feeling, the feeling that I'm aspiring for in the course of this particular human form of life. I'm aspiring to place all those feelings in alignment with my feelings for Krishna. And that takes a while, but you're operating with using this language that we've been reading, Vidya Shakti, from the internal potency perspective. Or say it the other way, the reverse. Forgetfulness of Krishna causes all these other feelings. There's nothing wrong with those other feelings, but they just need to have Krishna in the picture. How do you get Krishna in the picture? That's what I was trying to describe. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.